there is no urgency to cut rate this year, Eugene.
No, so the U.S. We still expect the U.S. Fed to cut rates this year, right? So but the sequence or the start of rate cuts has been delayed, right? So this is what the Fed has been guiding to the markets. As a result, the interest rate environment overall will remain elevated globally.
Okay, so when do you think the Fed will cut rates, the interest rate?
I think it's difficult to predict. I think so far we've been pricing around a couple, two rate hikes this year, maybe Q3, Q4. Again, there's a delay in monetary policy normalization in the U.S., and I think that affects many emerging markets, including Indonesia, right?
Okay, so what is your evaluation of high interest rates era impact for banking sectors, especially in emerging markets like Indonesia?
I think there's a few developments we're watching, be it emerging markets globally or Indonesia specifically. So one aspect is how does high interest rates affect credit demand, right? Are we seeing a slowdown in credit growth, right? So certainly something we're watching carefully in Indonesia. The other aspect is whether high interest rates will finally result in more problem loans for the banks, right? Because globally, and same applies to Indonesia, we have seen very little new NPLs from the bank's balance sheets. So will higher interest rates finally result in more NPLs? That's an open question, right? So, I mean, so far we don't expect much new NPLs. And finally, high interest rates or rising rates lead to some losses on the bank's securities investments. So your bond portfolios reprice downwards. So those are the things we look at for emerging markets and Indonesia.
Mm-hmm. How do you think the Central Governor of Indonesia already hiked the interest rates ahead of the Fed?
I think the decision, from my side, wasn't completely unexpected because the authorities in Indonesia had to protect the national currency, right? So, and indeed, the rate hike in Indonesia has resulted in a stronger currency. So the losses of the rupiah have reversed a bit. But again, I think fundamentally in Asia, among the large emerging markets, Indonesia and Malaysia are kind of in the same boat in a way that their currencies continue to weaken, and governments have to and central banks have to introduce various measures to stabilize the currency. I think in Indonesia, the rate hike did exactly that. Right. So it stabilized a bit the currency.
All right. Does the cost of fund increase due to interest rates hike also affect the fundamental of banking sector, especially in Indonesia? And does this phenomenon also happen in other countries in Asia?
Well, indeed. So when interest rates go up, generally we see banks making more money, right? Net interest margins increase, and banks are more profitable. But again, there's a limit to what you can do in terms of constant repricing of your loans. So at a certain stage, you reach a ceiling where you cannot reprice it anymore because it just becomes too expensive to borrow for clients. I think what we're seeing in Indonesia is that credit repricing has actually reached a limit. So this is why banks are guiding for lower net interest margins for this year. Again, there's also the part where funding costs increase because your customers transition to term deposits or to money market accounts or money market products away from banks, right? So banks, as a result, have to increase rates on deposits more significantly. So again, in Indonesia, what we're seeing is that deposits will reprice faster than loans. As a result, we're going to see a bit of margin compression this year. But don't get me wrong, any margin compression will come in Indonesia from a very, very, very high level. So Indonesian banks have probably the highest net interest margin in the world.
All right. As you mentioned about the borrowing costs will be higher, does Moody's see any potential credit ratings downgrade for banking in this current condition?
Well, I think the fundamentals of the banking system remain intact. We like that the Indonesian banks have extremely strong capital buffers and very, very high profitability. So those are very, very high buffers to offset any risks, be it foreign currency risks or credit risks that may materialize. So the buffers are very strong. And actually, so far in the last 6 months or so, we've seen a number of upgrades of banks. And so those are positive developments, again, for the banking system.